this guy, this couch, with the idea that I could either do a tiling texture or I could do a unique texture, right? I could even compare the two, but if I have that this UV mapped now, I can now texture it. And I actually made a video on UV mapping the couch. I just have to post it up, and then I'm waiting for the captions on it, but I can post that up today. And making the textures. So what I want to do is, a lot of times people have a tendency of, they look for textures by Googling them, and that's fine, you know. But the problem is that people waste a lot of time looking for that perfect texture when it'd probably be faster at times just to make one, right? This is a fabric texture that I made by hand. And it only takes just a few minutes to make it, a couple of minutes. And the general idea is literally going in and the same technique I use to make this is the same technique I use to do things like, or similar to hair, to wood. So if I can't find...
Can you make leather this way as well?
You can make it in Photoshop. This particular technique of like the fibers and stuff, I would tweak it. I would do it differently for leather, but yes, you can make leather inside of here. And what I want to do is show you basically how we could create this texture, and then how we would start to apply it. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of Photoshop of this, of how to generate this. And like I said, I have the video, I just have to post it up. So we've got this guy here. I'm just going to make a new one. So I'm going to go File, New in Photoshop. And I'm just going to make a texture that is 1024 by 1024 pixels.
1024 by 1024?
Yes. You always want, for textures, a 72 pixels per inch. It's not like print where you would go 200, 300. It's always 72 because it's about the height and width, not how many pixels are in there. I'm going to do RGB. The only reason I would use CMYK is if I was, my end game was to create print, right? So instead of using CMYK, I'm using RGB, which is additive color, how your pixels are for your screen. And I'm going to use 8-bit. And I just like to use a white background. I also don't have it. Sometimes it'll be preset that there's artboards on. I uncheck that because I like having a background. Artboards basically means that you're going to have start with a transparency and layers. And I usually just like to have a background when I'm working in Maya, because depending on how I save it, sometimes I don't want there to be a transparency and it'll think there is one and it'll kind of screw things up. So Artboard is unchecked. So 1024 by 1024, no artboard, 72 pixels per inch, RGB 8-bit, white background. Now I've got a perfect square. And this is that resolution thing that you want to stick to, and using 512 by 512, 1024 by 1024, 2048 by 2048. You don't want to go higher than that, but you want to keep to those measurements. And I have that in the Word doc in the guide that I supplied. So if we go to the Texturing 101 section, and it goes over, you know, some of the things in here, but one of them is just the resolutions are noted in here. Okay. So, I've got my background, and what I'm going to do first is so you can see it. I press X, actually press D, which sets default. The colors to black and white for the foreground, background. X swaps the background and the foreground color. So I want it black and white for what I'm going to do right now. I go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. And let me kind of dim this a little bit. Actually, I'll close you. So what I have here is the noise that's showing. I'm going to press Control plus so you can zoom in and start to see it. So if some of you may have used noise before, some of you may not.
What I see is that the noise adds a graininess.
Yes. So basically it's adding that, and I'm just going to quickly tell you what the differences in the settings are. Okay? Because this makes a difference depending on how you're using it. So there's uniform and there's Gaussian. Uniform, you would see it more if I had a 50% gray image, but what you can see is that the noise it's adding is in the mid-range. In other words, I see lots of grays, right? I also have monochromatic turned on. If I don't, then it's what you'll see are colored RGB pixels, all these little colored pixels. I turn monochromatic on because I just want grayscale right now. So uniform, it's giving me more of a, you know, subtle kind of grays that are in there, and there are times I would use this. Gaussian, you'll notice, gives me a broader range where I can see dark pixels and light pixels and different variants of gray. So in essence, I have a broader range of grayscale and contrast. Okay. I want to use Gaussian, and I'm using my noise at about 19%. Okay. Some Gaussian monochromatic 19% noise, and I hit OK. So the next thing, actually I'll zoom in. The next thing I want to do is I want to make a pattern from this noise. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to use a motion blur. And what you'll notice, it's a little hard with the projector. Sorry about that. Let me zoom in a little bit. Can you guys see that? It's basically turning the noise into a grain. So the less of a distance I have, the shorter it's stretching out those pixels. The higher it is, the more it's doing it. And in all honesty, this pattern, you know what? Hold on. Let me duplicate this because so you can see it a little bit more. And I'm going to adjust the levels control just so you can see it more in the projector because it's kind of hard to see. That should do it. Alrighty, so let me try that again. Filter, blur, motion blur. There we go. Can you see that a little better now?
Start with noise?
Noise, yeah. So we have noise, and now I'm doing a motion blur, and I've changed the angle so it's 90 degrees. So it's basically, it's going straight up and down. And the more I pull that, the longer the lines are. The shorter, the less pixels, the shorter the lines are. This is the essence of how I do a lot of my hand-painted textures I start to go into.
It almost looks like silk there.
It can be several things. Question?
So basically, it's basically with this bar over here under this one. So if I pull the bar, then if I
Yes.
pull the bar backward, there's more grain.
You're stretching it out more, yeah.
Exactly. But then compared if I did it like this, then
If you do it too far, then yeah, you're going to blur it out, and it actually loses the effect. So what I'm doing, this is how I usually start out with a lot of textures that I might want to do. I could make a brushed metal. I could make, if I stretch it out a certain amount, this could be wood grain, or the wood grain. Right now I'm going to use it for fabric, right? And make that sort of grain where I could make jean fabric, cheesecloth, all sorts of stuff. But you'll see how in a second. I also use this to make hair. How coarse or how straight it is and long depends on how much of a motion blur I start to put on it. Okay. So I've got this. I'm going to stretch it to about 30 and hit OK. Now I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to duplicate it by dragging it into the new page icon at the bottom of the layers right next to the garbage can. So drag it into that and it duplicates it. Did you guys see it?
No, I didn't see.
So I'll do it again. So I take whatever layer I'm trying to work off of. In this case, it's the top because I duplicated it so you guys could see it more. And I drag that layer into the new icon layer. At the bottom right of my layers, there's these icons. And all the way on the right, there's a garbage can. And to the left of it is a new page. You'll notice that icon in Windows and stuff, or Word. Drag that layer into that icon and let go, and it duplicates it. I can also just right-click on it and say Duplicate Layer. Okay. So now I've got two copies of that. And just so you guys can see it, I'm going to... So I'm at that first one. I'm going to call it vertical. So I just double-click on the name. And then the copy of it, I'm going to call horizontal. And the reason being is because I'm going to transform this layer and rotate it 90 degrees. So I've got two layers. One's a duplicate of the other. They look exactly the same. And the horizontal one, I have it selected. And I'm going to hit Control T, which is free transform. So if I zoom out, you'll see now these little icons like that. I can manipulate it. And if I go to a corner, do you see my cursor turns into this little rotation icon up at the corner? So I'm in the view, left mouse click and just hold down Shift, and I can rotate this and make it snap so it's 90 degrees. Okay. And once it's rotated, now you can see the grain on this layer. You see it's horizontal. It's going left to right instead of up and down. And I press Enter to lock it down. So now I have one layer. The horizontal layer is going, the grain is left to right. If I shut that one off, the vertical layer is going up and down. Does that work for everybody so far? Huh?
So Professor,
So duplicate that layer
By dragging.
right to there. But you have to press enter first. So is the bottom one vertical? Hide this one for a second. Yeah, you got it. That's fine. You can name this one vertical if you want to. So you're good. So I can't see the layer underneath right now. So I have to change the blending mode. So check this out. I have the top layer selected. I go to the blending mode. Now, that's a good question. On a Windows machine, it's easier because all you have to do is once you have you've clicked on the blending mode, you just move the mouse roller, and then I can change. Look at that, between the different blending modes. Right here.
Right, because I'm not able to click on it because that is locked.
So you have the top layer selected. Got it?
And then
Click on where it says normal.
right.
And now start going through the different ones. And when I do that, I want you to look at this. Look at the pattern, actually eyes up front for a second, because this is neat. As I go through the blending modes, this is darkened. Do you see that pattern it has? Multiply. Color burn, linear burn. Darken, that one's kind of cool. Lighten, this is the one I like. Look at that. You see that? Now, it's like, yeah, I like that one. Let me zoom out of there. And what I want to do is make a flattened version of this. And I'll crank the contrast up so you can see the pattern better. So I'm going to say select all, Control A. You can also just go to select and literally click all. It's all the way at the top. And then I go to edit, copy merged, or shift Control C. And now just paste that down. Edit, paste, or Control V. And now that's my flattened version.
So now you do
Control A to select all, and I have the top layer selected.
and after you press like horizontal.
So after you have I've changed it so that I like how it looks, both of them composited together. I select everything. I do an edit, copy merged.
Edit, and then copy merge.
And then paste. And now I have a flattened version, and I still have those extra copies if I want to go back and tweak things out.
Edit, copy merge.
And then paste.
Copy merge and paste with.
Just paste. Edit, paste.
That creates a new layer.
Yep, a flattened version of what we saw. So it doesn't need the blending modes. This is a flattened piece. And now, if I hit Control L for levels, and this little diagram here shows my shadows, midtones, and highlights. And just so we can see it, I'm going to crank this up so you guys can see it a lot better. Look at the fabric right now. You see that? So what we're getting is this simulation of a woven threads, right? This guy can, depending on how I combine it with a color, it can be jeans, it can be cloth. It can also be my bump map, right? To add just a little bit of that bump to the fabric inside of my scene, but it's not done yet. Because if I try to tile this, it's going to give me seams on the edges, which I don't want. And I want to be able to shrink this down because threads are tiny. And if I just stick it on there right now, maybe okay, but the threads are going to, the fabric's going to be too big, right? So I've got this. I've tweaked the levels out a little more so for, just because of the projector more than anything else. But what I want, and you can see I have it, is depth. I don't want it to be just black and white. There are levels of gray which show depth of these threads, that it's not just one transparent, just single layer. It's actually thicker than that. So I have some areas that are lighter, some areas that are darker, stuff like that. Okay, so I hit OK. And that looks pretty good, except, watch this. If I go to an edge, like the border of it, what you'll see is it kind of ends abruptly and there may be a little bit of bleeding. And where we'll really see this is when we offset it. So this is how you make a seamless texture. A seamless texture is a texture that you might be using a lot for different things, where you have a texture that's tiled, but you don't see where it's connecting to and repeating itself. So how do I see if it's doing that? If I go to filter, I'm on that flattened layer, and if I go to filter, other, offset, filter, other, offset, and I set the horizontal pixels and vertical pixels to 50% of what my resolution is. So in other words, my resolution was 1024 by 1024, so I offset it half that, 512 by 512. And what we see here now, do you see this seam going down? You see that? That's what I need to get rid of, because if I try to tile it right now, I'm going to have that pattern, that patchy pattern repeating itself every time I tile it. And I don't want that. It should just be a consistent fabric texture.
Where was that? It was filter and
Other, offset.
other offset.
So I leave it at being offset at 512 by 512, wrap around, and I hit OK. 512 by 512. 512 and then 512 in the next box. And that will put it so I see this pattern going as an X, like a crosshair right down the middle, horizontally and vertically. That's where the edges are meeting with each other when this tiles. So this pattern's easy to clean up. It's going to be small, it's going to be tight, so I'm going to show you a super fast way of getting rid of it. I'm going to go all the way to the left, and annoyingly, in Photoshop, they've kind of changed things in here too. But the icon all the way at the bottom, if I click on it, gives me all the tools that are missing. So it's all the way to the left, above where you see your foreground, middle ground color. And when I click on it, it opens up a menu that has all these other tools that you just don't see. Let me see. Oh, yeah, the little three dots right there. So it's this guy right here. Oh, it pulls up a menu where you can bring over the tools that you want inside of here. the tool that we want to get is the healing brush. Looks like a little band-aid. And it's called the Spot Healing Brush tool. And it looks like a little band-aid with a little circle behind it.
Spot healing?
Yeah.
Okay,
So when I use the Spot Healing Brush tool, this is kind of neat. Watch this when I go over the pattern that's here. So you see this pattern that I don't want to have. I use the Spot Healing Brush and I just go right across it. And it makes it go away. See?
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
That's a new tool, huh?
They've refined it a lot more. You can sometimes, like, if you see anything, you can kind of run in there. But for this pattern, it'll be totally fine, and it just gets rid of it. And I do another offset just to make sure that I haven't created a new pattern. Okay. So I go Filter, Other, Offset, and hit OK and see if it created any new patterns, and it didn't. So I'm like, sweet, it works. Does that make sense? So now I've got this. I could use this as my bump and color it in Maya. Or I can make variations of it inside of here. In either case, I would save this one out as a Targa file, .tga file. And I would make this one my bump map. If I want to add color to it in Maya and then have a little more control over it, or excuse me, in Photoshop, then I'd add a brand new layer. But first, I'll save this as a, if I do a save as, let me just show you. Where I'd want to save it is the source images of my project, Gesundheit. All textures you're going to use in your scene go into the source images folder. And then I'd give it a name like, you know, fabric bump map or fabric bump. And then I'd save it into there. Gesundheit. And if I were to do it, I want it 24-bit pixel, 24 bits per pixel, not 32. The only time I use 32 is if I'm including an alpha channel with it, which we haven't gotten to yet. So real quick, if I want to do the color, I'd make a brand new layer, choose a color. It's not important because I can always tweak it out. But the color I'm going to do on a layer all by itself. And I hit, on a PC keyboard, it's Alt backspace. I believe on the Mac keyboard, it's Option backspace or Option delete. And then that fills the layer. So I'm on a brand new clean layer, not the one that I had because I don't want to damage that one. And I fill it, and then I can go through my blending modes. See? So now you see the color pattern there. That's a multiply, color burn, linear burn. That's kind of cool. And once again, you go to find which one you want. Overlay is nice because it gives you this sort of burlap kind of pattern. This also, I've used this pattern a lot for things like a lampshade and curtains and stuff like that. Or you could use it for actually a, whatchamacallit, for, you know, for a couch and stuff. So I've done that as well, depending on, then it looks more beige when it's shrunk down. Right. And then I would save those out as color versions. Okay. And I could even make a few different ones. But once that's done, you know, then I can go back and make my variations. Now, the other cool thing is, since I have this on a color layer all by itself, I can just hit Control U, and I can change the hue of this to a different color if I wanted. I can change the amount of saturation. I can even change the lightness of it. So it gives me a lot of controls that I could do. And I can even layer this. Where if I duplicated that color layer, and then on that other color layer change how it's sitting on top of that. I could even change its color as well. And I could just keep going with those. Does that make sense? So give you guys a few minutes. You can also take a pause, and then we'll go into adding those materials for Arnold